too much road rage going on out
No. Wasn't too bad on the way out here, I've got to say. Much more sensible.
Yeah.
Last week it was pouring, and of course people were being twits. So drive safe, everyone.
As we all should. We should make sure that we all get to the other end.
Yeah.
Every time we.
How pleasant would that be if everyone did that all the time?
Certainly.
Yeah.
So what are we going to talk about today?
I had a few sessions this week with people who had some of our little protocol. The testing protocols we do at New Leaf. So I thought I'd sort of mention just the sort of things that you pick up when you have these testing processes. Sound like a bit of a plan?
Yeah, certainly.
Yeah. So one of my ladies, she came in and she was wondering whether she was pre-diabetes. So because everything so far with medical tests aren't showing that she is. And one of the big things with medical testing when they're doing the glucose tolerance testing and that type of thing, it's very much about whether you are right on the edge of diabetes, because if that shows up, there are medications they give that, pretty much help to sort that out. Whereas our insulin resistance testing and which is basically finding cholesterol, HDL cholesterol, LDL cholesterol, triglycerides, but then there's mathematics that you do in the background to see how protected or not your body is and whether or not your body is taking insulin into the cells and making energy at the other end. So it's sort of more like you can find when you're pre-diabetes and then pre-diabetes. So it shows up before you get to the doctors and they say, sorry, diabetic, here's your drugs for the rest of your life.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So it's sort of nice to be able to find these things for people so that they can manage it and actually reverse it, while there's still a possibility. So that was one of the things that we did, and she was definitely in the pre-diabetic stage. So it wasn't diabetic, wasn't pre-diabetic, so it was pre-pre. So basically that means that at the moment her cells are really starting to struggle taking in insulin and spitting it out to make energy again. So you can imagine what that means if people are in this state. It means that they can have a few things happen. They can be exhausted after eating. So they can eat. Some people might recognise this as a thing. As soon as they have something that seems just a little bit more challenging to digest, they could go have a 2-hour kip, after eating. Have you ever sort of felt like that? Is that something that you recognise, or it's not you?
No, the only time I've really sort of felt like that is maybe on a Sunday afternoon after the roast,
That's after the beer as well, isn't it, Gavin?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was sort of interesting. So then we did have a look at her blood. So we're looking at the blood on the TV screen for half an hour. And there were a few other things going on. So because tiredness was one of her big issues, and she obviously had the sugar cravings and the mood swings with sugar cravings. So when we did the blood, what we found was that most of the red blood cells were the correct size, which is a good thing. But there were a lot that were way too small. Now, small red blood cells, when we're looking at them, they're called microcytes, and microcytes are iron deficient, which means that either the bone marrow or the nutrition in the body just isn't, we don't have enough iron stored so that the cells are created at the correct size. So once they're small in the bloodstream, we can't do anything about them. Red blood cells have got a shelf life of, say, 4-5 months. So once they're in the bloodstream too small, it means that we can't change them, but it also means we store 80% of our nutrients on cell walls, on the red blood cell walls.
Right.
So if they're too small, you've got less surface area to store your nutrition. So an iron deficiency can end up creating a low-level nutrient deficient of just about any other sort.
Yeah.
So it ends up creating all these issues. So when we're iron deficient, it's often not just iron. It can be so many other things. The other thing is when we're looking at people's, say, blood tests from the doctors, you would have ferritin. You're aware of ferritin. So when people do a full iron count, one of the ingredients, or one of the things they look for, I've been watching too much MasterChef this week. one of the ingredients is ferritin, and ferritin is stored iron. Now, as long as that stored iron is within a certain level, obviously it's fantastic to have nice levels of stored iron, but once it gets really high, you might have heard of hemochromatosis. Yeah. So hemochromatosis is basically when the iron is rusting people's cells. It's creating a real issue. The liver isn't metabolizing it properly, and it's creating a oxidative effect. So it's causing free radical damage in the body, which is why people get, they basically, it's like 200 years ago, they get bloodlet every so on. Take my blood. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think.
Well, I did that yesterday.
Yeah, right. Very good, very good. So that's sort of when we're looking at but the other things that I saw in the blood, there was definitely leaky gut. So there's these signs called hypersecretory platelets. So when we're looking at the blood cells, for example, the red blood cells are like the size of the end of your thumb, and the white blood cells are about the size of a 20-cent piece, and there's these things called platelets. Now, platelets, when you cut yourself, that's what comes along and it starts creating the healing, over the cut. So when you get pus, filled with white blood cells. So basically the white blood cells are really important for healing, and so are platelets. So platelets are like a clotting factor. You want it to be about right. You don't want them too big, you don't want them too small. But when you start seeing the platelets, it's like technical terminology, we see them blowing bubbles. Okay. And when they're blowing bubbles, that's when they're called hypersecretory platelets, and that is a real sign of leaky gut.
Right.
So the gut isn't as strong as it should be, which can lead to, people can have a cast iron stomach and still have this going on, so they might not be feeling any effects of it. But things like alcohol create leaky gut, too much gluten can create leaky gut, too much sugar can create leaky gut. Pretty much anything fun can create leaky gut. Yeah. There's sort of things that help to heal it are things, because glutamine and vitamin D, vitamin A, these are all important nutrients to help to heal the gut lining. Right. Glutamine's an amino acid, so it means when we're getting an adequate amount of protein in our diet, we should be able to be healing our gut, which is where there's a slight irony, since gluten is actually the protein that's in wheat. Yeah. So in theory, it should be able to help, but it's because it's genetically modified these days, it sort of messes with the gut a bit more.
It's not the original thing.
It's not the original thing.
Is there an easy way for you to think to yourself, well, there could be something along that line, or do you really have to do the scientific tests?
Oh, well, some people, for a start, I'm very glad that medical science has finally caught up with naturopaths. About 3 years ago, they proved that there was such a thing as leaky gut. Yeah. Yay! It takes forever, but anyway, we get there. So that's really nice. And so therefore, the funny thing is, medically, they're trying to develop a drug that you can take with your food to stop getting leaky gut when you eat. Yeah. The problem with that is that the gut is supposed to be slightly leaky. No, right. That's not even right.
What does it actually mean when you say leaky gut?
Okay, so you can imagine the cells in the gut are supposed to be hard packed together. Yeah. But then all day, every day, there's like a little sponginess between the cells, or a little elasticity, if you imagine that. Right. Sort of like, those bags you get the onions in, they're supposed to move and open and close and that sort of thing. So as the cells are opening and closing, if you don't have the correct nutrition between the cells, it's like they've stretched and they can't bounce back.
Right.
So that bounciness between the cells, that's vitamin D, vitamin A. So it's the sunshine, it's the eggs, it's the it's the white fishes, it's those sort of things that are high in vitamins A and D. So, as well as things like carrots and sweet potatoes, and but that's beta carotene. Yeah. You have to convert it to vitamin A, so not quite the same. And don't know whether you know this, diabetics can't actually convert beta carotene to vitamin A. So
can you do it in your blender or something?
Well, it's sort of an interesting thing because anyway, so you do need to be able to reboot that elasticity in the gut wall. So that's what it's about, leaky gut. So and the reason it's supposed to be leaky is that there's these little cells called zonulin, and zonulin is supposed to dip its toe from the gut out into the bloodstream all day long. Okay. So it's doing that, and what it's doing is taking a measurement of what our bloodstream's doing. So we've talked before about the fact that 80-90% of immunity is in the gut. We also make 95% of serotonin in the gut. So there's a huge amount of things that happen in the gut. Yeah. So when the gut isn't working properly, or your little zonulin isn't working properly, then it means that the bloodstream isn't getting what it needs. So we're more likely to be getting infections. We're more likely to be building allergies and intolerances. We're more likely not to be digesting our meals, so maybe even all the heartburn, digestive issues, constipation, diarrhea, bloating, that sort of thing. So, so leaky gut, the things that people often notice is when they eat, they get heartburn, or when they eat, they get bloated, or they get alternating, constipation, diarrhea. It doesn't have to be linked with any of those particularly, but people often just come in really not feeling well, or they know that they can't have a glass of wine, because they feel too sick. They get headaches straight away, or, and alcohol, by the way, causes leaky gut. So if someone's had a big night on the drink and then they come in for live blood, looking at their blood the next day, that's the sort of thing where we go, yeah, that's not a surprise. But that's good for them to see as well. I have no problem with what people eat or drink before we look at their blood, because I just explain it.
Yeah.
So I think anything's good for people to see.
Yeah.
Even dehydration. One of my ladies this week, she's the one who thought she was diabetic. She drinks 3 litres of water every day without fail. And yet we saw so many dehydrated cells in her blood. So obviously something is happening where the water just can't get in, she can't get the waste products out, or it could even be that there's so much inflammation outside the cells that the body is deliberately holding on to that fluid to dilute the toxins.
Right.
So, there's always reasons for it, and that's why, quite often, especially if someone comes in with things they've been trying to sort out for 2 years or something like that, we go, okay, let's do some testing and just have a look.
Yeah.
If the budget allows for it, obviously, we can do a lot of other stuff, beforehand, and kinesiology shows us lots of things anyway.
Yeah.
But, so it's quite a neat little process to get into to really start going, okay, what's going on?
Yes, it was very intriguing.
Yeah, it's cool.
You think you might have to have a bit of a rest and from that, and we'll play a bit of music.
Sounds good.
Now, I've picked the band Morrison today.
Nice.
We're doing a bit